Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we delve into chilling real-life stories. Today we uncover a tragic tale of obsession that ended in heartbreak. James Kavanaugh was well respected in Brookside, known for his dedication to his family and his role as a community leader. In this close-knit town he was seen as the model husband and father, someone others aspired to be. He spent his days managing a successful construction business and his evenings volunteering at local charities, always eager to lend a hand. Lucy, his 7-year-old daughter, was the light of his life. Her laughter filled their home with joy, and he took pride in being involved in her upbringing. When Lucy started second grade at Brookside Elementary, excitement filled the air. She was assigned to Miss Ann Foster, a young teacher who had recently moved to town. Anne was known for her enthusiasm, kindness, and ability to connect with her students in ways that left lasting impressions. She fostered a warm environment in her classroom where children felt valued and engaged. Lucy quickly took a liking to her, often coming home with stories about the fun activities and lessons they shared. To James, hearing Lucy talk about Anne only fueled his curiosity. Initially, James's admiration for Anne seemed harmless. He attended school events and volunteered to help with classroom activities, eager to support Lucy while catching glimpses of her teacher. However, as the weeks passed, his casual interest evolved into an unsettling fixation. Each time he dropped Lucy off at school or picked her up, he found himself lingering just a little longer, hoping to exchange a few words with Anne. He began to notice the little details, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke to the children, the way she effortlessly commanded their attention, and the genuine care she showed for each of her students. James's thoughts began to stray from the platonic admiration of a proud parent to something darker. He found himself daydreaming about Anne, imagining conversations with her that never happened. This obsession began to consume his thoughts, overshadowing his responsibilities as a husband and father. He started keeping track of her schedule, timing his visits to coincide with moments when she was most likely to be alone, convincing himself that these encounters were mere coincidences. The thrill of the chase had taken hold, and he could feel himself spiraling into a world where the boundaries of reality and fantasy began to blur. As the weeks turned into months, James Kavanaugh's innocent admiration for Anne Foster morphed into a dangerous obsession that clouded his judgment. Each morning as he dropped Lucy off at school, he felt a rush of excitement at the prospect of seeing her, his heart racing with anticipation. The routine became an integral part of his day. Watching Anne interact with the children, her laughter ringing through the playground, made him feel alive. But with each fleeting glance, a sense of entitlement began to take root in his mind, a belief that he deserved to be part of her world. Driven by this growing obsession, James started to seek out information about Anne's life beyond the classroom. He discovered her social media accounts and spent hours poring over her posts, analyzing every detail. Photos of her hiking in the mountains, enjoying coffee with friends, or celebrating birthdays with family members became windows into a life he yearned to be a part of. The more he learned, the more he convinced himself that they shared a connection that transcended the ordinary boundaries of teacher and parent. With this delusion growing stronger, James devised a plan to accidentally encounter Anne outside of school. He learned that she jogged in the local park every evening, so he began taking his own runs, timing his outings to intersect with hers. At first, these encounters felt serendipitous. He would smile, wave, and engage in small talk about the weather or their mutual love for the outdoors. Anne, busy with her life, treated these interactions lightly, seeing him as just another friendly face in the neighborhood. But to James, each conversation fed his fantasies, reinforcing the idea that they were destined to be together. As his obsession deepened, James's behavior began to shift. He became more brazen, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to approach her. Friends and family began to notice a change in him. Laura, his wife, commented on his preoccupation, but he brushed her off, insisting he was simply being a devoted father. With every subtle move he made to invade Anne's life, he justified it to himself as an act of love, Yet the fine line between admiration and obsession had blurred beyond recognition. The thrill of these encounters replaced the warmth of his family life, and soon James found himself drawn deeper into a web of fantasy. His thoughts consumed by Anne, he began neglecting his responsibilities at home, spending more time plotting how to engage with her. What he had once viewed as innocent admiration now felt like a consuming fire, and the boundaries of his obsession were beginning to fade away, leading him into uncharted territory where danger lurked just beyond the horizon. As James's obsession with Anne grew stronger, the facade of his perfect life began to crack. Laura, his wife, could no longer ignore the subtle signs that something was amiss. James had always been attentive and engaged, but lately he had become distant and secretive. Late nights spent working at the office were accompanied by vague explanations and hurried phone calls. Laura felt a gnawing sense of unease settle over her, a nagging intuition that something was wrong. One evening, while searching for a family photo on the shared computer, Laura stumbled upon a hidden folder. Intrigued, she clicked it open, her heart sinking as she scanned the contents. The folder was filled with screenshots of Anne's social media posts, pictures of her smiling with friends, hiking in the mountains, and even candid shots from school events where Lucy was present. In a separate section, there were articles about Anne's background and her teaching philosophy, all meticulously saved. The realization hit Laura like a punch to the gut. This was not mere admiration. This was a full-blown obsession. Feeling betrayed and confused, Laura confronted James, her heart racing as she spoke. She laid out her findings, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. But James's reaction shocked her. He dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, insisting that he was just a caring father who admired Anne's dedication to her job. He accused Laura of being paranoid, projecting his own guilt onto her, and with each denial, Laura's resolve began to waver. Was she overreacting? Or was there something darker at play? Despite his reassurances, Laura could feel the tension building in their home. That night, unable to shake her suspicions, she took matters into her own hands. She decided to warn Anne without alerting James, fearing he might intercept any direct communication. With a heavy heart, she wrote an anonymous note, urging Anne to be cautious around James. She dropped it into the school mailbox, hoping it would reach the teacher before it was too late. But James's paranoia had already begun to fester. He noticed Laura's anxious demeanor and her newfound secrecy, and it set off alarm bells in his mind. When Laura mentioned a letter she had sent to the school, James quickly pieced together the puzzle and realized that his wife was onto him. The fear of exposure triggered something dark within him, propelling his obsession with Anne into a dangerous territory where rationality no longer existed. In his mind, he couldn't let anyone come between him and the life he imagined with her. Determined to regain control, he started plotting his next move, unaware of the irreversible path he was forging. As the days turned into weeks, James's obsession with Anne spiraled out of control. What had begun as a seemingly innocent admiration morphed into a dark fixation that consumed his every thought. He became increasingly convinced that Anne was the missing piece in his life, the one who could bring him the happiness he craved. Each time he saw her at school, the thrill of their encounters felt intoxicating, but the moments spent apart filled him with a sense of desperation. Driven by this mounting obsession, James began to track Anne's movements meticulously. He learned not only her jogging schedule but also her favorite coffee shop and the local spots she frequented. He found himself at these places more often, hoping for a chance encounter that would allow him to engage her in conversation. He started to manipulate situations, timing his runs to intersect with hers, feigning surprise when their paths crossed. Although Anne initially greeted him with warmth, her friendly demeanor began to wane as she sensed the intensity behind his gaze. The subtle changes in her body language did not go unnoticed by James, they only served to heighten his obsession. Anne's unease grew as she noticed James lingering longer than necessary during their interactions. He would ask probing questions about her personal life, and his comments took on an unsettling tone that made her skin crawl. She confided in friends about her discomfort, but they reassured her that he was just a dedicated father. However, Anne couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time she saw James, a sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach, yet she dismissed it as paranoia. To regain a sense of control over her life, Anne sought guidance from her principal. She explained the situation, her voice shaking as she shared her concerns about James's behavior. The principal listened, assuring her that the school would take her seriously and offering resources for support. But Anne's apprehension lingered. She felt vulnerable, as if her every move was being monitored. James, meanwhile, grew increasingly erratic. The fear of being exposed, combined with his conviction that Anne was meant to be in his life, pushed him further into the shadows. Late at night, he would scroll through her social media, obsessively planning out scenarios in which he could finally express his feelings. In his mind, he crafted elaborate narratives where he saved her from an unhappy life, believing he was the hero in their story. The fine line between reality and fantasy blurred even further, and the more he fixated on Anne, the more unhinged he became. He was slipping away from the man he once was, consumed by a desire that would lead him down a dark and dangerous path, one from which there would be no turning back. On a cold November evening, a sense of dread hung thick in the air as Anne Foster returned to her apartment after a long day at school. The sky was a deep indigo, stars flickering in the distance, but Anne felt no comfort from the beauty of the night. For weeks, she had been on high alert, her senses heightened by James's increasingly intrusive behavior. Each encounter with him had chipped away at her sense of safety, and she now felt like a shadow of her former self. As she approached her front door, her heart raced. Something felt off. The door was ajar, an ominous sight that sent chills down her spine. Panic surged through her as she hesitated, scanning the hallway for signs of danger. With every instinct screaming at her to turn back, she took a deep breath and stepped inside, the darkness enveloping her like a shroud. She fumbled for the light switch, her heart pounding in her chest as she called out, hoping for a response that would never come. Standing in the dim light of her apartment, Anne's worst fears were confirmed when she spotted James in the shadows, his presence a chilling reminder of the danger she had sensed for so long. He stood there, a blend of desperation and determination on his face, as if he had crossed a line from which there was no return. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken tension. In that moment, Anne understood that James had not come to talk, he had come to confront his reality. James had convinced himself that this was a pivotal moment in their relationship. He believed that if he could just make her see how deeply he cared, she would understand his feelings. But to Anne, this was a nightmare unfolding. She tried to back away, her instincts screaming at her to escape, but James stepped forward, blocking her path. The thrill he had once felt during their fleeting encounters had transformed into something darker, a mixture of rage and desperation that had overtaken his reason. The confrontation escalated quickly, the emotional weight of the situation morphing into violence. In a surge of anger and fear, James's pent-up obsession erupted, leading to an unspeakable act. Anne's life was cut short in an instant, the promise of a future extinguished by the very man who had once claimed to admire her. The echoes of her struggles lingered in the silence that followed, a tragic reminder of how easily admiration can turn into something far more sinister. When the police arrived, the scene was devastating. Anne's life had ended abruptly, leaving a community in shock and mourning. James sat in stunned silence, his mind racing as he faced the reality of what he had done. The carefully constructed life he had built crumbled around him, replaced by the haunting consequences of his obsession. Brookside was forever altered, left to grapple with the horror of a once beloved family man who had descended into darkness, a reminder of how fragile the line is between love and madness.